Well, ladies and gentlemen, actually a lot happened today, and a lot of it was really predictable because you could see where the politics were going for a while. I've covered a lot of these stories, and they've now progressed, and it's interesting to see what's happening in terms of South African politics. So before we get on to the main articles of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. You know the gigs, guys. I'd really like to get to 200,000 subscribers. Please click the bell icon and just subscribe to the channel. Now, on to the first article, and that is that the ANC has issued an immediate release. It was that urgent, entitled The ANC Statement on the Economic Blockade Against Cuba. Now, according to the ANC, they are condemning what they described as the total blockade of fuel supplies to Cuba, calling it a direct assault on the Cuban people and part of an unjust unilateral embargo. Guess who's done the embargo? Yep, that's right, the United States. Now, the ANC statement claims that the blockade followed an alleged invasion of Venezuela, and this is obviously following the kidnapping of President Maduro and his wife. I say kidnapping, remember it was an arrest and he was taken to the US to be charged. But according to the ANC, it's an invasion. Now, they also allege that threats have been made against Mexico, and that illegal expropriation of resources are being framed as humanitarian interventions. That's what the ANC is saying is going on here. They say that they went in there for humanitarian purposes, and it's not. It's expropriation of resources. Now, the ANC says that this embargo has persisted since March 1958 and has called for an immediate lifting of the fuel blockade and the trade embargo. And again, if you watch my videos around Venezuela, you will recall that one of the things I said would result from the removal of Maduro is actually a squeeze on the funds and the fuel going to Cuba. So it was actually obvious that Cuba would be hit severely by what occurred with Maduro. Now, the statement called on progressive forces and countries to join solidarity effort and reaffirm support for strengthening bilateral and multilateral cooperation with Cuba. So you have to look at that and say, well, who the hell are these progressive forces and countries that the ANC is calling for an alignment with? And you see a lot of those progressive socialist forces now actually in the UN. And that is one of the reasons why, well, Donald Trump is not a fan. Now, talking of the UN Secretary General has warned that the UN is on the brink of imminent financial collapse. Finally, some good news. Now, he cited countries refusing to pay or failing to pay their bills. I suppose a bit like South Africa, I assume. It's amazing what happens when you get a load of socialists together and push socialist programs. It's like they like to spend other people's money, but they don't really like to pay. And now the UN's learning that big time, aren't they? Now, he wrote that either all member states must pay in full and on time, or financial rules must be overhauled to prevent collapse. Now, the UN has faced chronic liquidation problems for years due to late or partial payments, and this has caused hiring freezes and cutbacks. Like I said, great news. Keep cutting it, you bloody bastards. Anyway, talking of the US, we cannot ignore AGOA, because according to the latest news, AGOA has been voted on. This is the extension for a one-year backing. Now, you have to remember that South Africa is at risk of losing its AGOA benefits, but those benefits are kind of academic at this point in time because South Africa has the 30% reciprocal tariffs on or duties on its current products. Now, because of that, any extension to AGOA that may include South Africa anyway is kind of limited in terms of applicability. It's not really going to do anything. But it's important to understand that the United States Senate has passed a one-year extension of the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is set to be tied to a government funding bill, which may extend it to the end of 2026. Now, there were reports of a potential 3-year extension previously, but currently it's only 1 year. Now, a U.S. trade representative said that South Africa specifically could face different treatment or be separated from AGOA completely. And this follows John Kennedy's suggestion that South Africa was a unique problem. Now, all these individuals are reporting that the relevance of AGOA has effectively still been reduced with the reciprocal tariffs. And obviously, the inclusion of Iran into the BRICS naval exercise has also gained the ire of many in the American White House, which means that it looks like AGOA is being passed. South Africa won't benefit. We're not going to benefit from this, and we're basically not going to benefit from it because of the company we keep. Go back to the first article. We're now like simping for Cuba, we simped for Venezuela, and we simped with Iran. Not exactly like, let's do loads of trade together, shall we, America? Because you guys love these people. Now, this has led to Julius Malema warning about US meddling in South Africa. And he warned that the upcoming local government elections could involve US interference, which could include funding ideological opponents and fracturing democracy along trouble lines by traditional leaders. No proof of this interference, but we've seen how the Democrats in America and how the left have used this whole suggestion of foreign interference before to undermine the election, and it looks like Malema's like, my time to shine, I'm going to use this too. Now, these remarks have to be placed in context because Pretoria and Washington's relationship is strained. And don't forget, if you've watched my videos last week, you will recall that diplomatic tension has been extended to Israel. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And this obviously came after Israeli diplomats were made persona non grata and kicked out the country. And you will recall, if you watch my videos around that, the reason for that was because of their interference in the Eastern Cape. So you see how they're using the interference argument. Now, Malema spoke at an EFF podium at the OR Tambo Conference Center to 730 delegates. Now, this itself sounds like a lot, but it's actually a far lower figure than Malema has previously in the past been able to get to listen to him talk trash. Now, one of the very key interesting things that he said during that address was that he said that rich people, white people, he said rich people are whites, must pay for water and electricity for poor South Africans. And he argued that the poor cannot afford monthly service payments, so that white people should pay, he says. Now, he suggests that the reason that whites should pay for all of this is payback for the benefits they gained during apartheid. So it's amazing how many of these payback of apartheid benefits that white people have been made to do for the last 30 years. And apparently it's just never going to end. Now, as I said, let's go back to that Israeli topic. So as you recall, if you watch my videos on this topic, an Israeli diplomat was expelled from South Africa. He was made persona non grata and he was sent packing. And this is because he dared to go and visit certain rural areas and underperforming areas in the Eastern Cape. And he made donations to them and effectively said he's sympathetic to their plight, and he said that he would attempt to assist. Now, the Eastern Cape Health MEC is launching an investigation into 2 hospital CEOs who hosted the Israeli delegation when they toured their facilities. Apparently, this was all done without provincial approval. Now, the CEOs governed Nelson Mandela Academic Hospital and the Mthatha Regional Hospital, and the visit itself was organized by an Eastern Cape king. And again, I've covered this in numerous videos. Now, the Eastern Cape Premier, Oscar, has even been agitated by these so-called tours. It's amazing how everybody's been completely butthurt because the Israelis have walked around and just seen the hellholes that they make their people live in. I mean, you've got MECs panicking because everybody's seen the state the hospital's in. The Premier's panicking because he's seen the state that the province is in. And these individuals are all like, yeah, should never have allowed them to see us. I mean, what? We can only have North Korean type tours, can we? Where we show them the good stuff and pretend that the majority of the stuff that doesn't go right, that just doesn't exist. Now, the issue also appears that the provincial head office was not aware of the visit, and the CEOs were wrong to allow the visits without approval of the provincial office. It's amazing how the government seems to think that it literally controls every element of public life. So even though aid hasn't yet been given because they couldn't, now that everybody's been expelled, the government don't care about aid or the potential handover of aid. They're just like, no, We've been made to look bad, ergo we must expel the diplomats. Now, you see, all of this is interesting because in a related but unrelated article, a Nedbank report has cited that newly acquired capital investment in South Africa has risen by 16%. I mean, that sounds like good news, right? But all of this has come from private sector commitments. According to reports, private firms contributed 382.5 billion, and this is up from 116 billion in 2024. Now, the report gives examples of numerous forms of investment that's occurring, but it's also important to understand that the report states that state-owned projects, they're not actually resulting in any extra capital to the state. In fact, the government's own planned projects have fallen year by year. So you need to understand that currently in South Africa, the state is contributing nothing. According to the report, infrastructure is only really contributing around 11.8 billion in investments into the country. So understand that the investment currently occurring in the state is not coming from the government sectors. So going back to the previous article around the hospitals, you think that they would welcome private sector or even foreign government sector investment because the state is not investing. But as I said previously, the state doesn't care. It's ideology before poverty. They don't care if their people are living in poverty. They want to adopt their ideology. Now, coming on to a very final news story, and I think it's quite an important news story given my video from yesterday. And this news story is around John Steenhuisen. Now, as you will know, John Steenhuisen is currently, well, not actually in the good lights of everybody. John's been doing some tours around the country, and many farmers have stopped there and been very vocal with him about how they basically think he's ANC light, and he's no different from the last lot.
Farmers were there. You never bothered yourself, sir, to meet with us. Very disappointing, because I thought when you become a Minister of Agriculture, you'll do better than Mamtogo Didiza, who's having stinking attitude, being the leader of the people again. Very disappointed. And then it worries me that if you get a person from another political party, that he will do better, he will excel. You can see, okay, this, birds of the same feathers flock together. It's a GNU anyway.
Now, in the latest news article, it has reported that John Steenhuisen intends to step down at the next DA elections and will not stand again at the next DA elective conference, which is in April. So apparently John's going to make the announcement. Well, as of the time of recording, it's today. So I'm recording the day prior. So it will be the day that you watch this that he's going to do a press announcement. Now, the report states that there is uncertainty around the GNU, and they've referenced prior budget-related tensions. You can't just get rid of John because he is involved in the budget, and that would kind of cause disruption and uncertainty within the GNU. But the reality is, John's likely to go. He will probably stay on as Minister of Agriculture, but the reports suggest that it will be Gordon Hill Lewis who will then stand the DA leader. John will no longer be party leader, and obviously the markets have reacted with gains because nobody likes John. Even the markets dislike John. And now that John is suggesting he's going to leave, even the markets are like, thank God for that. Now, you see, the problem is, and the reason why nobody likes John is because of the foot and mouth disease in the Eastern Cape, which, as you know, is threatening livestock and dairy operations. Now, many farmers have been going to John saying, we've been writing to you for ages, and to be frank, they're saying he's a failed minister. Now, reports coming out of Agri-Eastern Cape are even suggesting that foot and mouth disease in the Eastern Cape is spreading like wildfire, and all of this is going unchallenged by John himself. The reports are suggesting that John Steenhuisen suggests that he's made the largest procurement of vaccines in the history of the country, and he's vaccinated more than 2 million animals, but others are attempting to refute that by saying, actually, those figures that John are attempting to cling on to actually go from 2007. And so if you look at the 2 million animals that have been vaccinated, they include animals that had been vaccinated for over 10, 20 years by the ANC. So the report argues that really the only way that we are going to fix this is to involve the private sector, allow the private sector to manufacture vaccines, and those vaccines can then be supplied in order to inoculate the livestock. But John is going the way of the ANC, and he wants his department to have sole exclusivity on procurement and supply of the vaccines, which again is why many farmers are saying they're acceptable of John, because John is pretty much the same as an ANC minister at this point in time. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news of today. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and until next time, bye.